Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie and I'm a preservation specialist at NEDCC. Welcome to our session on understanding the causes and effects of collections deterioration. Being able to identify these factors is important for the stewardship of your collections, and these root causes of deterioration are things that we return to again and again at NEDCC in our courses and webinars whenever we're discussing the preservation of our collections and specific actions that we can take to prolong their existence, such as by providing proper environmental conditions and physical storage. So these are important principles to familiarize yourself with, and they'll help you to understand some of the more complex topics that we tackle in other trainings. There are many different types of deterioration that can affect our collections. In some cases, deterioration may be physical, such as when a historic map is torn, or it can be chemical, as it is when destructive reactions are triggered by light exposure. Deterioration may happen suddenly, for example, if there's a fire in your collections facility, or it can occur over longer periods of time, such as with the gradual embrittlement of materials that are stored at incorrect temperatures. This session is organized into several parts to help understand the relationship between inherent issues within our materials and the external factors that surround them. As you can see from the slide, we'll start by discussing chemical forms of deterioration, then move on to biological, mechanical, incidental, and inherent vice. When discussing the chemical causes of deterioration, we need to keep a few factors in mind. These include evaluating if the item consists of organic versus inorganic matter, the temperature and relative humidity in your storage and display spaces, light exposure that materials receive, and pollutants. Ultimately, everyone and everything can be categorized as either organic or inorganic matter. Organic materials include wood, paper, textiles, and animal parts like ivory, bone, and leather. They also include natural materials that aren't as obviously organic, things like coal and fuel oil, both of which are actually derived from fossilized plants and animals, as well as synthetic materials, so things like plastics, which are still made from chemicals extracted from plant and animal products. All organic materials will deteriorate over time. Inorganic materials include stone, metal, ceramic, and glass. Many photo processes include metal and glass, and some pigments and inks include minerals and metallic oxides. Inorganic materials are usually fairly stable, but they can still react with other materials to cause degradation. Temperature has a really significant impact on our collections, and incorrect temperature is one of the prime causes of deterioration. This includes temperatures that are too high, too low, and those that fluctuate too widely. Archival materials like paper and photographs are hygroscopic, which means that they readily absorb and release moisture. They respond to seasonal changes in temperature and relative humidity by expanding and contracting. These dimensional changes accelerate deterioration and can lead to visible damage, things like cockling paper, flaking ink, and cracked emulsion on photographs. Very warm or very cold conditions can cause your archival materials to dry out or deteriorate at a higher pace. High heat in particular catalyzes chemical reactions that ultimately promote deterioration. So with this in mind, you really need to consider where you store your historic materials. Are you storing things in the attic or maybe out in a barn in the summer? These are spaces that likely experience significant changes in temperature, as well as hitting higher highs and lower lows than the main space of an insulated building. If you are in an insulated building with HVAC, consider if you're storing items underneath heating vents or air ducts. These can also strongly impact the stability of temperature around your materials. Fortunately, most of our paper-based collections are comfortable in the same environment that we're comfortable in, so around 68 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. However, Keeping temperatures lower is almost always going to be better. So if you have dedicated storage space, rather than say mixed storage and workspace, dropping the temperature down to about 55 degrees is a great idea. Doing so will help your collections quite a bit because the cooler that you go, the more slowly these chemical reactions will occur. Relative humidity is a term that gets used a lot in libraries and museums. It refers to the amount of water vapor in a specific amount of air as compared to how much total water could be held in that air at that same temperature. It's a ratio which we always express as a percentage, and because it's dependent on temperature, these two measurements are always considered together. High relative humidity has a number of dangerous effects for collections. Not only can moisture in the air catalyze chemical reactions, but high relative humidity actually promotes mold and pests as well. On the other hand, low humidity can dry out paper and create brittle pages. So again, in this situation, you really want to consider the location of your collection. Are you storing materials in the basement or in a moist environment like a boathouse? Or are you in a region of the country that traditionally has very high or very low humidity? You want to maintain a stable, low relative humidity for your items. Ideally, that means your relative humidity will be between 30 and 50%. Depending on your location and existing HVAC options, this might be a bit difficult to maintain, but even setting up a dehumidifier in your storage area or home can do a lot to help your collection. Just make sure that you are checking its water tank each day so that it doesn't overflow. Another chemical consideration is exposure to light. Like heat, light provides energy to chemical reactions, which accelerates deterioration. Light exposure can cause permanent fading and yellowing of the materials, like the book cover on screen, and oftentimes that damage is irreversible. It's important to realize that while all light causes deterioration, sources that are rich in UV radiation are going to be the most damaging. So consider the amount of light that your materials will be exposed to. Are lights frequently left on in the room? Are there windows? And if there are windows, do they have curtains or shades that can be drawn? Strategies for mitigating light damage include keeping sensitive materials like photographs in boxes and out of direct light, as well as turning off the lights in your storage and access spaces when materials are not in use, installing and importantly using blinds or shades on windows near collections, and installing UV blocking filters on fluorescent lights or switching to LEDs which don't emit UV. One aspect of preservation that we might not immediately consider is air quality, and the gaseous and particulate matter that are entering our storage spaces. Pollutants can enter a collection space through open windows, chimneys, or even be carried in on patrons and staff. Particulate pollutants come from skin cells, soot, fibers, hair, pollen, things of that nature. These substances make up the general dust that you find in buildings and homes, and they can attract insects, but they can also be abrasive and react with collection materials. Notably, the effect of these will be worse in areas with high temperature and humidity. Gaseous pollutants come from outside sources like traffic exhaust, as well as indoor sources like cleaning materials and electrical equipment. Many cleaning products contain hydrogen peroxide or ammonia, which are emitted into the air when you use them, and things like photocopiers can actually emit ozone as well. Both types of pollutants can cause chemical reactions when interacting with each other and your collections. Review what's happening in and around your items. Is there any renovation or construction work going on? Be sure to look both inside and outside of your building. Understanding and addressing the chemical agents that we just discussed, so temperature, relative humidity, light, and pollutants, provides the broadest benefit to collections as a whole. These four agents play a role in many of the problems that we encounter in smaller museums, historical societies, and family collections. Now, let's take a look at some of the biological causes of deterioration. These are kind of the gross ones. Biological deterioration is often dependent upon the chemical factors that I mentioned, including heat, high relative humidity, light, and so on. Most cultural heritage professionals have dealt with mold at one time or another, although hopefully it is just on a small scale. Now, this is in part because mold spores are everywhere. We're not going to be able to eliminate all mold spores from our collections environments, but we can control the circumstances that lead to their active growth and prevent outbreaks from happening. Mold and mildew are types of fungi, which means that they're microorganisms that depend on other organisms for sustenance. To germinate, they require a food source, which might be provided by our collections, but they also need certain environmental conditions, including relative humidity and temperature, to favor their growth. Keeping our collection spaces in the temperature and relative humidity ranges we discussed earlier can prevent mold from germinating. Some strains of mold can be dangerous to people and pose a major health hazard, so it is really important to identify and isolate any growth. Always wear protective equipment like nitrile gloves and an N95 mask when dealing with mold. And anyone with respiratory problems or health issues should be especially cautious of working around moldy items. Mold remediation should be conducted by a trained professional, but you can also take a look at our Preservation Leaflet 3.8, which is linked on screen, for some additional guidance on preventing mold and on salvaging moldy books and paper. When we discuss pests, we're talking about any living organism that has the potential to damage or destroy our collections. There's a wide range of pests out there, but roaches, silverfish, moths, beetles, mice, and rats are some of the most common. They can cause damage directly through their nesting and eating habits, or indirectly through their leavings. To prevent attracting pests, you want to keep your photographs and collections away from any food or clutter. Many insects also like fairly damp, warm, and often dim environments. Mice unfortunately like to join us when it gets cold outside, and then our homes and our buildings become a warm place for them to hole up. If you do find an infestation, it's important to speak with a conservator before you call in an exterminator. Many pesticides actually count as gaseous pollutants and will damage your collections. So we certainly don't want to try to eliminate one problem by introducing another. While the chemical and biological agents of deterioration are broad environmental causes of damage, we ourselves, or sometimes our predecessors, may also inadvertently cause problems through improper storage. This is what we've referred to as mechanical forms of damage or deterioration. So take a look at your storage and really consider how the setup is affecting your materials. You'll want to look for overhanging items or materials that are stacked on top of each other. The top image on this slide is particularly egregious, but even more evenly stacked books or boxes will still put pressure on the items beneath them. Keep an eye out for weak shelving, anything that isn't supporting your materials properly. Look for rolled and folded items, which will lead to warping and tearing. And in fact, with the two bottom images, you can see a stack of photographs where someone probably didn't even mean to roll them, but because of the pressure being applied by the elastic band, it has caused some permanent curling of the photos. And also keep an eye out for boxes that are the wrong size. This can include boxes that are too small, which can again lead to curling or folding of materials. But it also applies to boxes that are too big, in which case items will shift around anytime you access them, leading to mechanical damage. Similarly, handling our materials can cause damage. Sometimes it's hard to remember to handle our papers and books as carefully as, say, a glass negative or a piece of artwork, but the documents really do need just as much love. You want to be mindful of not overpacking your boxes, your drawers, or shelves because excessive weight and pressure will damage your materials. Make sure you're always supporting your materials appropriately, whether it's in storage or during use. And also consider how your users are handling materials. For example, do you provide researchers with nitrile gloves if they're looking at photographs? We discuss handling concerns as they relate to specific formats in many of our webinars. So if you're looking for guidance on scrapbooks, photographs, or other materials, definitely check those out. Of course, humans may cause damage for any number of reasons. Maybe it's an accident, or maybe it's an intentional thing like a political act. Or during a theft, a painting can get damaged. In any case, it's really important to be vigilant about security and care. And of course, there are events that we may simply have no control over. Emergencies like flooding and fire affect everything in our buildings. Small emergencies like a burst pipe or a leaking window may be fairly easily resolved, but larger disasters like a fire or roof damage can cause permanent loss to your collection. It's important to remember that these disasters can happen to anyone, so you need to be prepared. Having a good inventory of your collection and knowing what to do in an emergency, as well as who to call, will help you to maintain control of your materials in both the short and the long term. So far, we've talked about the external factors influencing the deterioration of our collections, such as heat, incorrect humidity, light, pollution, pests, poor storage materials, improper handling, and so on. However, certain materials have internal factors that make them more prone to deterioration, which is what we call inherent vice. Nitrate film is a classic example of a material with inherent vice because the chemical makeup of the film base is unstable, and even in the best of storage conditions, it will continue to degrade over time. Paper with a high lignin content is another common example. While lignin is found in many paper-based items, it's acidic and it contributes to their embrittlement and deterioration over time. While certain materials may have a tendency to self-destruct, the deterioration of our collections isn't only about the weaknesses produced during the manufacturing process. It's really an interplay between these internal and external factors. We can do a lot to improve the preservation of our collections by considering how an inherent vice may interact with the chemical, biological, mechanical, and incidental factors that we've discussed today. Okay, hopefully that gives you a better sense of the root causes of deterioration and sets you up to look at your own collections with fresh eyes. You might spot some things that you haven't noticed before. Please feel free to check out our other webinars, which build on the basics of what you've learned here today. And as always, we at Preservation Services are happy to answer any questions you might have about this material or anything else related to the preservation of your collections. Please feel free to reach out and say hi. You can contact us via the email address and phone number on screen, and we're always happy to chat. But that is it for today, so thank you again for joining me, and until next time.